Hello and welcome to Indus Special. My name is Meshal Malik. Now we are hearing a lot about the population time bomb, especially in our region. And with the UN predictions of the world population expected to reach 8.6 billion by 2030, this bomb might in fact be ticking faster. Let's discuss this further with our esteemed guests. We're joined today by Shakil Ahmed, who is the Assistant Country Director and Chief of Development Policy Unit at UNDP Pakistan, and also Dr. Mohammad Nizamuddin, who is the President of Population Association of Pakistan. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Nizamuddin, let's start with you. Now, Pakistan is currently the 6th most populous country in the world, and Imran Khan also talked about curbing the issue of population. So what exactly have been the trends related to population so far in Pakistan?
Well, we discussed this issue in the Supreme Court, Chief Justice and Prime Minister last week. Pakistan had started out very well in the 60s with a good national program. But then after 10 years, it was not kept up to date. It was not funded as it was started. So as a result, we suffered a lot. So we have lagged behind all our Asian counterparts.
And
when we started out, Bangladesh and Pakistan were the same population. Now Bangladesh has 50 million population less than us. So I think we have lost a lot of time. Now we have to wake up. That's why this call has come from the Chief Justice and Prime Minister to do something on emergency basis, on crisis management basis.
But the
this is a good sign.
Population trends in Pakistan, specifically in relation to the demographic situation, have there been an increasing rise in birth rates?
Death rate has been declining, except, in fact, all death rates in general are declining. Birth rates are also declining, but the rate of decline is not as fast as expected, as it happened in other countries. So rate is the problem, not the rate. The rate of decline is the problem.
Where do you think the government has been specifically lacking in terms of tackling this issue of population growth?
It has been lacking. It has been back and forth. Some governments were very active, like as I said, in the 70s and 60s, they were very active. But 80s, 90s, they have been very slow, not active. But program management has been there, their ministry has been working, but somehow that spirit with which it started out in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, that did not continue.
And with this current government, can we expect the trend to perhaps change, go back to there being a more proactive approach towards curbing population growth?
Well, the good thing about Pakistani situation is that men and women do want to reduce the family size. They do want to practice family planning. There are about 17-18% couples do not want to have any more children, but they don't get reliable supplies close to where they're living. So they cannot travel to distances, they cannot pay heavy cost in the market. So the government has facilities, but they are not reaching to the target groups, which is living in far-flung areas in the villages.
Shakil, on the same point that Dr. Nizamuddin talked about, what do you think about the future trends in Pakistan related to population growth?
Well, I think if we don't take any action, the future trends are very clear. We would continue to grow with this kind of high growth rate of 2.4%. But really, we have to do something. And I think there are different actors and stakeholders who need to be engaged. Of course, the government has to take lead. As was said earlier, in 1960s and 1990s, when the government was more proactive in terms of its family planning programs, we saw quite a reduction in the growth rate. But also, we see that the contraceptive prevalence rate also increased quite a bit. But after the 2000, we see that there hasn't been much focus from the government side on this particular issue, and that's why we see that we have quite a huge growth rate. But having said that, and of course the government is the key actor in this particular problem. but we also have to take the society along. I think the religious leaders have to kind of to play an important role. I mean, we can learn from Bangladesh, for example, and also the private sector is again, as was said earlier. I mean, if these contraceptives are expensive and if people can't afford that, then obviously we see a problem over there. So you need to have a more what we call a kind of a whole of society approach, where you have the government, the private sector, as well as the society to kind of to do a role in addressing this particular issue.
Shakil, now you mentioned Bangladesh and that we could learn from them. Could you expand a little on what exactly they did to curb their population growth?
Pakistan was doing with these lady health workers program. What they have done is that they introduced this female workers assistant program, something like that, where the young female used to connect with the rural population to give them awareness on family planning. So that was one aspect of that. So that was the kind of outreach they did, which is important. Second is that they also engaged the the husbands, the male members of the household, because as we also see in Pakistan, at times women do not have an easy access to contraceptives. So there, they created an awareness among the male members of the households, and the male members helped them to get access to the contraceptives. And thirdly, of course, I think they also kind of work with the religious leaders. Again, that is a kind of a segment of population which is quite important in the case of Pakistan as well.
Dr. Nizamuddin, now Shakil mentioned a number of measures that can be taken. Can you tell us a little about the hindrances, the blockages that come up when people do try to take initiatives, especially in the region of India, Pakistan, and also Bangladesh?
I think our major problem has been the implementation of the program that we developed over the years. We do have good program, but the implementation takes place mostly in urban areas. Rural areas have been left out, and the facilities, services available to the rural population is negligible. Unless we have a crash program of reaching them through mobile vans, through continuous camps, and meeting their needs, our program will not succeed. And that's what's happening. Is the slow growth has taken place for the last 20 years. To catch up that, we need to have an emergency program, very targeted to those couples who really want to reduce the family size, but they're not having good facilities, good methodologies, good methods. So we need to reach. Nowadays, we have very good methods available. They should be given to the men and women, and we have not been reaching the men as compared to Bangladesh did. We should have a special program to reach the men, talk to them, special motivational programs. Combined with this, with good services available to the rural population, we may be able to make some dent. But now we have already a large base population. So doubling time, as some demographers are saying, 30 years, the doubling time of population could be 40 years, but not more than that. We can make a difference because we already have a large base.
Dr. Nizamuddin, you mentioned here how there is a difference between the awareness being given to people in rural centers compared to those of urban centers. Can you tell us a little about there being a disparity or a difference between population growth in rural areas compared to urbanized areas in Pakistan?
Generally, the new census results also indicate to you the rural fertility, rural population growth, of course, compared to the urban areas is higher. And if you compare higher urban Karachi area, for example, is much lower than compared to rural Sindh areas. So there's always been a tendency with the rural population because they don't get services. And there are difficulties to reach the total population because there are some hindrances in some cases by the male attitude or sometimes the family pressurizes, but overall, they're willing to practice. If you meet the unmet demand of rural areas, we can make a big difference. There are 17% couples who really don't want to have any more children, but they're not getting reliable, regular, sustained services for them.
So there is a problem at the end of the services sector where there aren't enough adequate professionals reaching out to these people. That's what you're trying to say, Dr. Nizamuddin?
This is primarily the reason that the structural arrangement have to be changed. We need to really have, like in Iran or in Bangladesh, each village should have a house, what we call in Iran, they call health house. We should, instead of sending somebody from cities, we should have people living in the rural areas and serving that village population. And we can multiply such facilities in the rural areas and provide them, periodically visit them through mobile vans to check the quality. But there are so many possibilities. We need to really get out of our stationary clinics, go to the rural areas where the people are living.
Shakil, I'd like to move to you and let's talk about a little more, let's take this approach towards a global level. What are the key differences in population trends between developed nations and developing nations?
I think one of the key difference between not only the developed nations, but also maybe, across different developing nations, especially those developing nations which have developed themselves quite rapidly, is the population growth rate. You see that, the economic growth and the population growth, or there is a kind of inverse relationship. The economic growth has, whenever, you see the economic growth on increase, you see that, the population growth rate has also declined. But that is not the case in Pakistan. And now the problem with that is because, if you have more population, you have more people to feed, and it really kind of leads into a situation where the resources are very thinly spread. And I think that is what is happening in case of Pakistan. That's why you see that on the Human Development Index, for example, Pakistan is now lagging behind countries like even Bangladesh. Bangladesh has overtaken Pakistan on the Human Development Index, and we are kind of we have a quite poor performance on it. Also, we see that in the developed countries right now, we also have to be aware of another issue of aging. For example, in developed countries, most of the population is now aged population. That is also not good.
What's happening because, in the UK, in Japan, case, and the US, all of the aging population that you're referring to.
And because that is also not good in the sense because the government has to then take care of them because the government has to increase the pension expenditure, but there needs to be a balance between the two. But in case of Pakistan, I think the current population growth rate is quite unsustainable.
So what is exactly the demographic in Pakistan at this moment? Shakil, you mentioned how there's an aging population in developed nations, but here do we expect that in a couple of years there's going to be a youth bulge, as we call it?
Yes, we already have a youth bulge. In fact, right now around 62% of the population is below the age of 30. Which we can call youth, which is in the age bracket of 15 to 29 years. And this trend is going to continue until 2050, until 2040 or 2050. That is the period after which, we would be kind of, where the population would be getting more aged.
Shakil, you say that with a lot of certainty that this trend will continue until 2040, 2050. What makes you say that?
Well, just look at the trends, the population, trends right now, and this is not an unnatural thing. It has happened in other countries as well. Like it has happened in Malaysia, it is happening in Afghanistan, it is happening in India. So you have these different cycles where the demographic kind of trends are that you become kind of youth population. And then after some time, you get into more aged population. So Pakistan is now in the cycle of being more youth, and which also in a way which also provides a lot of opportunities for economic growth and prosperity. Yes, but that also depends how skillful the youth population is. But I think we have that window, and we really have to kind of make use of that particular window until 2050.
Dr. Nizamuddin, Shakil mentioned how population, the youth is almost acting as if a double-edged sword, where we have to make, if we train these youths regarding education with professional training, they can actually lead to productivity. But what do you see currently? Do you think that that's being done? Do you think that the youth bulge is being catered to?
I think the youth bulge has been there for many years now, and it's going to go on. What we have missed in the youth bulge, that we have not been able to properly educate them, skill them, so that they can have better source of income. They can be made an asset if we had invested them in their skill development, higher education. So at the moment they are not highly skilled, so they are not getting good jobs. They are mostly unemployed, and they cannot be exported because they don't have good skills. So best strategy available for Pakistan now is to really invest heavily on the youth population, giving them skilled training, such training in such areas of market which are needed. And some of them, they can be exported to other countries. Some of them can work here to start their own businesses. While simultaneously, we should also try to reduce population size growth through a very aggressive program providing good quality services to the people who need them most. So they have to have a simultaneous program. On the one hand, to skill the youth. On the other hand, reduce the population growth. Thirdly, we talked about aging population. We don't have high ratio of aging, but we have a large number of aging population. But that will also come by the time we become a stabilized population in 2050. We will have a significant number of older persons in Pakistan, almost 45 million, 65 plus. So I think we should be preparing for them as well.
Dr. Nizamuddin, what kind of preparations can be made by the government to help reduce the suffering of the aging population or to cater to them better?
Well, aging population, if you take the number, is still very large number. It's about 5 million people, 60 plus, 65, 5 million, more than 5 million. It's a large number, more than a country's size. We have not had any specific social policies for them. The 90% of the older persons are basically who have worked in the non-formal sector. They don't have any pension or social security. They have not worked in an organization. They have aged. They're farmers, workers, traders. So they have to work in order to survive. That's why they don't have a retirement age. So I think we need to have some kind of a universal pension system for the older persons, especially for those who cannot afford to work anymore. And there's a large number available. In terms of number, we have a large number.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mohammad Nizamuddin, for joining us. Shakil, let's take this conversation to you. Now, we're talking about how there aren't enough adequate measures being taken to cater to the growing population. But let's talk about what the population is doing to the resources that we already have. Can you tell us a little about that?
Well, of course, if you have limited resources and if the population size is much higher, of course you have a strain on the limited resources. It has a negative impact on the natural resources, of course, and as you would see that Pakistan is one of the countries which is very vulnerable to the effects of climate change. But we are also using our natural resources quite abundantly. Just take the example of water resources, for example. Now, there is a lot of discussion on water these days that the per capita availability of water has declined, and which is true. But, it is less of the availability of water, and it is more because the population size has increased. So if you have a particular amount of water and you are first dividing it, let's say on a population of 100 million, and now if you are dividing that water on a population of 200 million, so obviously, the per capita availability of water would decline, and that has happened. So that is, that is the kind of impact, the high population is making on the
Shakil, I would just like a little clarification here. So we talk about water shortage, and there's a lot of material that's coming up and saying that water shortage, as pressing as it is, it's also the problem of misallocation of water. So in this instance, when we have a growing population, is the issue that we have scarce resources or that our resources are being misallocated?
Issues are both. I mean, like, we use, 90% of our water is being used in agriculture sector, and the practices that we have in agriculture sectors are not sustainable. We waste a lot of water over there. We also, we don't have a water saving kind of culture even at our household level. If you just ask people why are you using so much water, they would say it's free. Yes, so that is the dislocation issue is also there. But what I'm saying is that in addition to that, this is also issue of the thinly spread of water resources over a huge population. So again, in terms of the natural availability of water, the water flow that we have been getting from different sources like rain or from springs and others, that flow hasn't changed much. The only problem is that we are not making best use of that flow, one, and secondly because the flow of that particular water is now thinly spread over a larger population size.
Thank you, Shakil. Stay with us, and we are going to take a little short break. When we return, we're going to discuss this ticking time bomb, which is the population. Hello and welcome back to Indus Special. We're joined with Justice Nasra Iqbal, who is a member of the Family Planning Movement of Pakistan. Thank you for joining us. Justice Nasra, can you tell us a little about how society can create awareness and target and curb this bulging population?
You will be surprised to know that 90% of the women in Pakistan are fully aware the benefits of family planning, and they want to have small families. It's not that they don't appreciate this fact or that they have a lack of awareness. But the problem is, and especially in the villages, that there is a lack of service delivery. They don't have the provision of contraceptives, and I feel it is our responsibility to provide them the proper service delivery at their doorstep. And if that is provided to the women, then they would certainly benefit from it. It's the men who resist family planning because they think, particularly in the villages, that if they have many children, especially sons, they will help them in farming and in doing whatever they are doing, making a livelihood. But that is not correct. Because when there are so many children and they are neglected when they are growing up, they don't look after the parents when they are old.
Justice Nasra, we heard from Dr. Nizamuddin earlier too that it's the men who are resistant towards receiving advice regarding family planning. But what can we do to take them on board?
You know, whenever I address any group of men and they say that we don't want family planning because this is a human resource, and they are even well-read people who say that this is our human resource and we must have it. The question is that there is a saying in Punjabi, and I will say it in Punjabi because there is no other way to communicate it. It says, "Diya le gaye jwai, te nuah le gaya poot, te tu reh gaya utriya, ove hi utda ut." No matter what they think and whatever they resist for whatever reason, the basic reality is that too many children will mean that there is no proper education, no proper meals, no proper health facility for the children that you produce. And it is not going to be productive for you even in your old age. Therefore, this is a concept which has to be explained to the men. Actually, the way to communicate this message to men is that you either use the mass communication media, and the most effective is the radio, because even in villages where there is no electricity, and there are villages in Pakistan that have no electricity, or even in the cities and villages we have so much load shedding, which has started again now, that the TV is not available at all times. But everybody practically has mobiles. There are more mobiles per capita in Pakistan than practically any other country in the world. And these mobiles also have the facility of radio. So when people are working in the fields or looking after their cattle or whatever this new poultry farming business has started, or doing whatever, they can listen to the radio. And this fact should be communicated to them, that having large families is counterproductive. And I have found, I talk to everybody I meet. If I sit in a cab like Uber or any other, I will talk to the taxi driver. If I go into a shop, I will talk to the shopkeeper, and they all say that we had too many children, we made a mistake. We didn't realize that many children are not helpful, and we are advising our own children not to have many children. So the realization is there, and I think most people now are not resistant. But the fact that we have to realize is service delivery is the most important need of the moment. And by service delivery, I mean to men and women. Whatever means of contraception they are willing to accept should be provided to them free by the state.
Shakil, Justice Rao also mentioned specifically problems related to health when we have a growing population. Now, the United Nations has a number of sustainable development goals, which include no poverty, zero hunger, good health, and well-being. And these are all related specifically to health. So can you tell us about how having a large population, these specific sustainable development goals are, there's a blockade to reach them?
Well, I mean, again, just if you look at the case of Pakistan, and if you look at the Human Development Index, there are three components of the Human Development Index: income, health, and education. And if you kind of look deeper into these three components, you would find that the actual issue in Pakistan is related to health and education. And these are the two components which basically kind of dragging Pakistan back on the human development outcomes. Now there are so many issues with that. For example, as was mentioned earlier, we have a very poor service delivery systems, but also the government is spending quite a meager amount of its resources on health. I mean, we are spending like less than 1% of GDP on health. It's much lower than other countries in the region who are spending around 2% or 3%. And same is the case with education. But we also see that investing in health, and especially in women health, would have a multiplier impact on other SDGs as well. So for example, and the study suggests that if the women are more healthy, they're going to take care of the children, but they can also be engaged in economic activities, and also the expenditure on health related items also kind of go down. So when you look at the health related SDGs, we also have to see the kind of linkages it creates with other SDGs, and all those other SDGs are kind of positively impacted by improvement in the health-related SDGs.
And Shakil, just to make sure our viewers understand too, could you tell us the importance of these SDGs? What is why are they so imperative in ensuring that the quality of life is good?
So SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, are 17 in number. And there are a kind of, each SDG is measured through a set of targets and indicators. But I think what is important to understand about the SDGs is that they basically integrate the three principles of sustainability: economic sustainability, social sustainability, and environmental sustainability. And this is for the first time that you have a framework which kind of takes into account all these three different angles of sustainability. They are important in the sense because they are very tangible in terms of the targets. So it really provides you a kind of a pathway to reach to a particular set of targets or outcomes over a period of time. But they're also I think they're very useful also in terms of making, in a kind of, creating a positive competition, across different countries. Because, you can easily compare different countries on the SDG framework with each other. But also, I think the one of the other angles of the SDG is that it can also help you to kind of, to devise policies and plans to reach a particular targets over a period of time. I mean, just to share with the viewers here, Pakistan, has taken so many steps in terms of localizing and mainstreaming the Sustainable Development Goals agenda in Pakistan. They have set up these SDG support units in the Planning Commission as well as across all the planning and development departments. And these units are basically kind of, serving as institutional frameworks to kind of, mainstream integrate SDGs in the public policy.
Justice Nasra, we hear a lot about how the Earth's resources are not enough to sustain the growing population. However, if we go back to the 1700s, Thomas Malthus' writings, he predicted that the population growth would inevitably swamp available food resources, and that didn't happen because of the innovation in the way we've increased crop yields, the GMOs that have been introduced in the market, so many other various factors that have made sure that there is enough food and starvation is reduced. So my question is that if in the past an emergency was declared and it didn't fall through, in fact, right now we're claiming that there might be an emergency. Could it just be that this is just, a problem that's always existed and we just keep bringing it up time and time again? Or is it actually an emergency?
It is an emergency, and I think it's not just a claim. We are in it now. When I was a child, I used to live next to the Civil Secretariat in Lahore. And on one side was the Civil Secretariat, on the other side was the lower courts. And all these rediwalas used to be outside, and they used to call out, Aane di roti te dal muft. Can you conceive today? Half the population at least is undernourished. They cannot afford 2 meals a day, and the price of one roti is approximately 10 rupees. Atta used to be in the 1960s. In 1960, it was 20 rupees a mond. Today, you cannot even get half a kilo of atta for 20 rupees. All the agricultural areas, or many of the agricultural areas surrounding Lahore, are now covered by colonies of all kinds. And we have less space for agriculture, and more people are now occupying these spaces in small villas or in apartments. And look at the population burgeoning. It was 3 crores and 25 million in 1951 census. And this census shows that our population has crossed 20 crores if we don't include Gilgit-Baltistan and Azad Kashmir. If we include that, then we have about 220 crores. So, there's no question the emergency is there today. We are in it. And if we don't somehow grapple with the situation today, 2025, our population will be double what it is today. There's no question that this is a false assertion and we are just being frightened like it was in the 17th century or the 18th century. That thesis is not available anymore. Unless, of course, we get onto the other planets, and Mars is so many light years away that our generation definitely cannot benefit from it.
Maybe the future generations will.
Yeah, if they can last out, maybe we can have before that a situation where we can't even last till that time. So we have to, this is a real emergency, and it is an urgent today emergency, not for tomorrow.
Shakil, in developed countries especially, there is a fear that if the birth rate falls, then there will be economic stagnation. How do we reconcile with these two ideas? That at one hand we're saying that growing population is bad, but then from the example of developed countries, we see that if birth rates fall, that could also pose a threat to the economy. So can you tell us a little about that?
Just very quickly go back to the Thomas Malthus theory. So that was about production. He basically said that when population reaches a particular threshold, the earth would not be able to produce enough food for that population to be fed. But now, we have seen that because of the technology and all those things, the production is not a problem, but the actual issue is of access. Access is basically that depends upon your purchasing power. So you have seen in the world, there are some countries which do not produce sufficient food, but they are self-sufficient in terms of the food availability because they can buy it from other countries, they can afford that. So one is the issues of so we have, when we look into these kind of issues, we have to look into the issues of accessibility, and then accessibility is linked to economic growth and prosperity as well. Now, I think this was a old kind of theory and false assumption that if you have many people, that would help you to kind of earn more. And I think that is something which is being one of the reasons for the population growth rate in Pakistan, because we want to have some of the families want to have more boys, because they think that they would be the kind of earning hands. But now, in an era of technology and innovation, it's all about productivity. And productivity is not related to like how many people you have, but it is about the skills and knowledge one possesses. So
apologies for interrupting here, but of course I agree with you that there has been technology, there's been several advancements in technology, but countries such as Japan do require more migration because of this very issue, that they have falling birth rates and that they feel that their productivity will be threatened. So how do we tackle that issue?
Well, they can afford now. Like, they one is that they can afford immigration. Like, people can come there, but also, they can also afford in providing incentives to their own people to have more children. Yes, I would say that one has to keep a balance. So we would never say that the country should have a 0% population growth rate. There is like what we call an optimal level of growth rate which has to be maintained. But at the same time, we also have to be aware of that the current growth rate is quite high, and it would not be sustainable for Pakistan in terms of providing resources to the growing population.
Justice Nasra, before we wrap, could you tell us a little about what people can do to spread more awareness, and how people themselves, if they want to get educated on this matter, reach out to which authorities can they reach out to?
I was already mentioning that I think the radio is the optimum method of reaching the public, but even otherwise, I think everyone, as I sit in a cab, I talk to the taxi driver, I talk to a shopkeeper, each one of us has to accept this as one's personal responsibility. And if I am in a position to extend contraceptives to maybe a serving woman who comes to my house or to a teacher who teaches my children, I can do that, and that is the best way. But about your zero growth and what happened in countries like Japan and China, you see the policy. Where we have so many children, we can have disincentives. The first child is born, should be given free birth facility, and the second child, it should be 50%. The third child, no benefit from the state. And similarly for education and health facilities later on, where we want disincentives. And now in China, where they had a one-child policy, now they have given incentives for 2 children, and also in the Nordic countries, anyone who has more than one child, the state provides maximum benefits. And this is something that we have in Pakistan to tell the people, that if they have one child, they will have maximum incentives. If they have 2, they will have slightly less, and more than that, the state will not provide any facility whatsoever. And this should be spread by you and me, by the electronic media, particularly the radio, and also the print media, so that everybody knows. But with this knowledge, we have to also give them the delivery.
Justice Nasra, so do you believe that China is the best model to follow in terms of their one-child policy, especially for Pakistan?
That was because they were overpopulated, but now that they have the 2-child policy, and for minorities, for Muslims, it was throughout a 2-child policy. So the policy has to be balanced according to the situation prevailing at that particular moment in time.
Thank you so much, Justice Nasra, for joining us, Shakil Ahmed for joining us. It was a pleasure talking to you. Now we're going to take a little short break, and when we return, we're going to discuss millennials. Stay with us. Welcome back to Indus Special. Now we hear a lot about the millennials, an age group of people born after the 80s till the mid-90s. This generation has been termed as several things: the snowflake generation, social media addicts, entitled. But how exactly are millennials different from generations that came before them? Let's discuss this further. We're joined by Jalaludin Ajab, who is a logician, and Dr. Nermeen Hamid, who is a development consultant. Thank you for joining us. Jalal, let's start with you. Do you think millennials are in fact entitled?
I think that this question is very difficult to answer, because each generation is divided more so amongst richer and poor and in other classes. So there are certain people who will always be lazy, and there are certain people who will always be very work-hardy.
So that's an inherent trait, you're saying?
No, because to some degree times do affect us. So for example, when World War I and World War II came, people were forced to not be lazy, because if they were lazy, they would die, right? They were forced to ration. I think that it's not that our generation is more lazy or more troublesome than other generations. It's simply that our time is now taken into consideration, even Syria and Iraq. Our time is simply more peaceful, and it requires less necessity to survive. You no longer have to forage for food as you had to 10,000 years ago, and you don't have to ration your food as you did in World War I and World War II. And so the natural instincts of the group that are lazy become more prevalent.
But then the baby boomers as well, the generation that came before us, they were not exactly born in the period of World War I and World War II. But why is there this distinct difference between both these generations, where the latter, the millennials and Generation Z are titled as being entitled?
Well, I don't think there is that much of a difference, especially as time is going on. You see more baby boomers are joining the internet. And those parts of baby boomers who are very into social justice and who are very aggressive are coming forward. The main point of this is the internet. The internet connected people by dividing people, because now no one had to talk to people in his or her immediate vicinity. One could join the internet and talk to someone who completely agreed with them. And so it's simply that Generation Z and the millennials joined the internet first. Now, but as time is going by and baby boomers, my father, your father, and our uncles and our aunts are joining the internet and learning WhatsApp and Facebook and all these tools, they are also
Let's bring
becoming.
Dr. Narmeen into this conversation too, who is from the previous generation. Dr. Narmeen, do you see a significant difference between the baby boomers and the millennials?
Definitely, Mishal. I think there is a huge difference. But I would, I'd like to go back to the point that Jalal made about not generalizing generations like that. And I think much more than the generational difference, it's a class difference or an economic difference. Because if you look at the current generation, whether they are the centennials born at the turn of the century or the millennials, you can see, and particularly in the local context of Pakistan, where we have 60% of the population that's below 30 years, there is a huge disparity. 25 million children are out of school. There are gender disparities in education and employment. So although we are in the digital age, the centennials and the millennials are of the internet age and the digital age, but there are more than 50% of these people belonging to this generation who do not have access to all of this, who are still living in my world. And so while there is immense opportunity, there is also a huge disparity and stark inequality. And so it's difficult to say how, when you were saying that the millennials are entitled, some millennials surely are entitled, but majority of them in Pakistan are not. I think that they are, in fact, in a very, very difficult place where the opportunities are right there, but they don't have access to them. And so they are perforce living in a generation before them in ways, in terms of the opportunities that they have, in terms of the capabilities that they have. And that, I think, brings in a lot of angst and frustration and anger and behavioral differences, which are very much on show in Pakistan. And I think that's where we really need to be
Dr.
focusing
Narmeen,
on.
so you mentioned an interesting point where you're saying that there is a lot of angst and frustration. Now, this is an issue that is widespread across the millennials, quote unquote. What is seen to be that suicide rates are rising, there is more depression. But if I'm clear, what you're trying to say is that the reasons are not necessarily the same across the globe. They're different for different parts of the world, and though there manifestation is the same, which is depression and angst, the causes are different.
Absolutely. I think it's very dangerous to generalize. And I think it's very important to look at local conditions, local circumstances, where we are. And for us, it's important to look at what's happening in Pakistan, where we have this huge youth bulge and the lack of opportunities. And that's surely, it's very obvious that that's the cause of the frustration and the angst. And whereas, we have the privileged part of society where we have first world problems and first world entitlements and opportunities, they have a different set of issues. But it doesn't make sense for us to focus on a small minority and try and band it with a global phenomenon. Whereas our problem, which is staring us in the face, is the majority of our youth, which is unentitled, which doesn't have opportunities, and which is, despite the fact that they can see the opportunities all around them, do not have access to them. And that's, I think, basically what we need to be looking at. Particularly this year, 2018, was very important, I think very significant, because 2018 is the year when children born at the turn of the century turned 18, are becoming adults. And so what are we offering these 18-year-olds this year? Is it opportunity, or is it frustration, or is it a whole wide world open to them, or them looking back into the backwaters, feeling like, there is this world of opportunity around them and they don't have the capability or the access to that world. So it's
Dr. Nermeen, just going back a little, you've mentioned how this is specific to this generation, but wasn't this frustration to not being able to access opportunities didn't it always exist? Because at the same time, while this might be a generation issue, as Jalal mentioned before, this is also a class issue. So wasn't this frustration always there? What's different about
Mishal,
this?
if I may add something. If I may add something to the good doctor's words, I think it's very important to talk about what a generation is. Now, a generation has a lot of key features, as we've said: political, economic, social. But at the center of it, that which divides one generation from another is ultimately down to belief systems, the collective psychology, and the technology of the age. Now, in such things, technology can be shared, but psychology and belief systems are the two things which are completely different.
Jalal will dive right into all of that in just a little bit. Since Dr. Nermeen has to leave, we'll just ask her a quick question. So do you believe that the psychology of this generation is different?
Again, you can't generalize. It's basically, you said that this was the case even for the older generation. I think what has happened now is that the speed of change is much faster. Technology is moving faster, and belief systems are not being able to catch up. As Jalal is saying, belief systems are important. And so there is this lag between technology and belief systems, and which we didn't have at the time of our generation, because, things were progressing but at a slower pace. The pace is much faster now. And the intergenerational transfer, which was usually, at that time it was unidirectional. So the older people, the older generation was transferring knowledge and values to the younger generation. Whereas now it's also working in reverse. Because it's the younger generation that is having to teach the older generation things. And a lot of the things that the older generation has to offer are being rejected or are being selectively accepted. And so I think that's where the problem lies.
Thank you so much, Dr. Narmeen, for joining us, taking some time out. Let's continue this discussion further with Jalal. So something that you mentioned, something that Dr. Narmeen mentioned was not to generalize. It just brings me back to another point and talking about how we have to make sure that the conversation is localized. Is this entire flux of ideas that are related to the millennials actually just a westernized concept that has traveled to this part of the world?
No. You see, without generalizing, you can also make distinct categories. And there is a distinct category which is millennialism, and a distinct category which is baby boomers. But the difference is not based in technology, because everyone has access to technology.
Not everyone.
Yes, not everyone. By what I mean that everyone has access to technology is in a mathematical sense, that everyone theoretically has access to the technology, but not everyone, no one outside of a particular generation has access to its collective consciousness, because by definition that is the collective consciousness of that generation itself. Now, as Dr. Narmeen said, that which our elders could teach us is not being as highly valued anymore. Well, what is it that elders teach us? Elders primarily forward a culture and a belief system. Now, when you do that, about 50 years ago, Carl Gustav Jung, a very famous psychoanalyst, wrote a book, Modern Man in Search of a Soul, right? And in it he pointed out that things are changing. At first, belief systems were based on relationships, as in, I believe in God because I have a relationship with God, and I believe in the family structure because I have a relationship with this particular family structure. In its extremity, it is tribalism, but in its other extremity, it is a very wholesome thing. Today, it is based on thought and reason. The problem there is that reason, when supplied to modern day situations or any practical situations, will fall into paralogisms, as Immanuel Kant, the German philosopher, informs us. And so that creates a sort of paradox for the modern millennial. He has abandoned his heritage. He has abandoned that which connected, or that which connected her, to the previous generations to some degree, and has not found anything in his own generation to create. Every person needs a religion. Even communist China has a religion. Even Stalinist Russia had a religion.
This has taken a very philosophical turn, something that's very, very interesting to discuss, but unfortunately we won't be able to do so since we're running out of time. Thank you so much for watching Indus Special, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.